Hello, I am recording the video and today's topic is data source controls in ASP.NET. ASP.NET includes data source controls that allow you to work with different type of data source such as database, an XML file or a middle tier business object. Data source control connect to and retrieve data from a data source and make it available for other control to bind to without requiring code. This topic provides information about the different type of data source controls in ASP.NET. The data source control model is extensible, so you can also create your own data source controls that interact with different data source or that provide additional functionality for an existing data source. Link data source control. The link data source control enable you to use link in the ASP.NET page to retrieve data from a database table or an in-memory data collection. You can use declarative markup to write all the conditions that are required in order, retrieve, filter, order and group the data. When you retrieve data from a SQL database table, you can also configure a linked data source like the update, insert and delete operations. You can do this writing SQL command to perform this task. By using the data source, you can reduce the amount of code that is reduced for data operation compared to performing the same operation in other data source controls. SQL data source controls. It controls, retrieve and modifies data using SQL command. The SQL data source control work with Microsoft SQL Server, OLTP, ODBC and Oracle database. The SQL data source control can return result as a data reader or a dataset. It supports sorting, filtering and caching when the results are written as a dataset. When you are working with Microsoft SQL Server, the control has the added benefit that cache result can be invalidated when the database changes. Entity data source control. The entity data source control support data binding scenarios based on the entity data model. This data specification represent data as a set of entities and relationship. The entity framework uses the EDM in object relational mapping and in other scenarios such as ADO.NET data services. The entity data source control support entity SQL as the query language and it support the query specification that is exposed by the object query. Object data source control. The object data source control work with business object or other class in web application that rely on middle tier business object to manage data. The control is designed to interact with an object that implements one or more methods to retrieve or modify data. When data bound control interact with the object data source to retrieve or modify data, the object data source control passes value from the bound control to the source object as parameter in method calls. The source object data retrieval method must return a dataset, data table, or data view, or an object that implements the IEnumerable interface. If the data is returned as a dataset, data table, or data view, the object data source control can cache the filter the data. You can also implement advanced paging scenarios if the source object accepts page size and record index information from the object data source. XML data source. The XML data source control reads and writes XML data so that you can work with it using controls such as the tree view and menu. The XML data source control can read either an XML file or string of XML. If the control is working with an XML file, it can write modified XML back to the source file. If a schema is available that describes the data, the XML data source control can use the schema to expose data using typed member. You can apply an XSLLT transformation to the XML data, which allows you to restructure the raw data from the XML file into a format better suited to the control you want to bind the XML data. You can also apply XPath expression to the XML data, which allows you to filter the XML data to return only certain nodes in the XML tree, to look for nodes that have specified values in them, and so on. Using an XPath expression disables the ability to insert new data. Access data source. The access data source control is a specialized version of the SQL data source designed to work especially with Microsoft Access.mdb files. As with the SQL data source, you use SQL statement to define how to control fetches and retrieve data. Sitemap data source control. The sitemap data source work with ASP.NET Sitemap and provide site navigation data. It is most commonly used with the menu control. It is also useful when you want to customize site navigation using sitemap data with web server control that are not especially designed for navigation, such as the tree view or drop down list. A data source control interacts with the data mount control and hides the complex data binding process. These are the tools that provide data to the data mount control and support execution of operations like insertion, deletion, sorting, and updates. Each data source control wraps a particular data provide relational database, XML documents, or custom classes, and helps in managing connection, selecting data, managing presentation aspects like paging, caching, manipulating data. There are many data source control available in ASP.NET for accessing data for SQL Server from ODBC or OLEDB server. Thank you.